For as long as Marcus could remember, his mother Ara had always been a mystery to him. She never spoke much about her work, and he had no idea that she was living a life far different from the one she portrayed. To him, she was just the woman who left early every morning, worked long hours, and cooked whatever was available when she came back. She was simple, humble, and ordinary. But what he didn't know was that his mother was far from ordinary. Ara had spent nearly 2 decades as a senior executive at a major multinational company, making 6-figure decisions that affected thousands. She had a salary that most people could only dream of, but she never flaunted her wealth. She had no need to. Ara believed that true power was quiet and unobtrusive, and she had long mastered the art of living in the shadows of her own success. She was content with her modest apartment, using the same old handbag year after year, wearing simple clothes bought from discount chains, and eating homemade meals. To her, wealth wasn't about showing off. It was about stability, security, and peace of mind. She had saved, invested, and accumulated wealth in silence. But one fateful afternoon, Marcus called. His voice was nervous, filled with an unusual apprehension. "Mom," he started, "Simone's parents are visiting from abroad. They want to meet you. We're having dinner on Saturday. Please come." The way he spoke made her feel uneasy. Something was off. It wasn't just a casual invitation, it felt like a request for something more. Ara hesitated. "Do they know anything about me?" she asked. There was a long pause. Then Marcus replied, almost sheepishly, "I told them you work in an office, that you live alone, that you're simple, that you don't have much." Simple. That word struck Ara like a blow to the chest. She was many things: successful, hardworking, and strong, but simple was the last thing she considered herself to be. She had been living this quiet, hidden life for years, but now she felt the need to make a statement. If Simone's family thought she was poor, she would let them believe it. She would show them exactly what they expected to see: a mother struggling to get by. That Saturday, she dressed deliberately poorly: a dull, faded gray dress, wrinkled and shapeless, the kind one might find at a thrift store. Her shoes were old, and her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail. She wasn't going to try to impress anyone. This was going to be her chance to see how Simone's family would treat someone they considered beneath them. But little did she know, the night was going to reveal far more than just the truth about her wealth. It was about to expose the true character of Simone's family. The day of the dinner arrived, and Ara took a deep breath as she got into a taxi. She couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest. As the taxi made its way toward the exclusive restaurant, she couldn't help but feel a strange mix of anticipation and sadness. Anticipation because she knew something monumental was about to unfold, and sadness because a small part of her still hoped she was wrong, that she was misjudging the situation. Her eyes scanned the bustling streets of the city. As they neared the high-end restaurant, the kind of place where the prices were hidden and the waiters wore crisp white uniforms, greeting guests with an air of pretentious formality. The building itself was impressive, its warm lights illuminating the night in an inviting glow. A doorman in white gloves opened the door, and Ara hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. Inside, the atmosphere was luxurious, with soft lighting and fine decorations. The smell of exquisite food filled the air, and elegant people dined at tables dressed in pristine linens. Ara couldn't help but feel out of place in her worn dress and old shoes. She was a woman who had seen and experienced so much, yet here, in this opulent setting, she felt like a shadow of herself. As soon as she entered, she saw Marcus standing by a long table near the windows. He wore a dark suit and a white shirt, looking sharp and anxious, as if something weighed heavily on his mind. Next to him was Simone Aristo. She looked immaculate, as always, in a tailored cream dress with gold accents, high heels, and her perfectly straight hair cascading over her shoulders. But her eyes weren't on Ara, they were on the door, waiting for something to happen. Ara could feel the tension in the air. Simone greeted her with a cold, perfunctory kiss on the cheek, her tone almost mechanical as she said, "Mother, it's nice to see you." There was no warmth in her voice, just an obligatory acknowledgement. Simone then introduced Ara to her parents, Veronica and Franklin, who were seated at the head of the table like royalty. Veronica was the first to look up. Ara saw her eyes scan her from head to toe, her gaze filled with judgment, the disdain in her expression barely hidden. Veronica's emerald green dress sparkled with sequins, and her jewelry glittered like a collection of precious stones. She extended a hand to Ara, cold and stiff as if it was an effort to greet her. Franklin, seated beside her, followed suit, offering a weak handshake and a fake smile. Ara didn't let their judgment affect her. She calmly took her seat at the far end of the table, far away from Simone's parents. With no one offering her assistance to pull out her chair, she felt like a second-class guest at her own son's dinner. As the night wore on, the conversation shifted from casual pleasantries to subtle insults disguised as compliments, and what Veronica said next would change everything. The dinner started off with a superficial conversation. Veronica and Franklin talked about their lavish travels, the exotic places they had visited, and the luxurious hotels they had stayed in. Veronica mentioned how they had paid $1,000 a night for their hotel room, as though it was an unremarkable detail. She went on to describe their rental car, a luxury vehicle that surely cost more than a modest car would. Then, with a slight glance toward Ara, she casually mentioned, "Oh, and we spent a few thousand on shopping. Nothing too extravagant, just a few things." Ara simply nodded, playing the part of the simple woman who had nothing to add to such conversations. She felt like a spectator in her own life, a pawn in a game she hadn't agreed to play. The food arrived, but it wasn't the quantity that struck Ara, was the presentation. The plates were small, decorated like art pieces, each morsel carefully placed. The portions were so tiny, Ara wondered if they'd still be hungry after dinner. Veronica cut into her steak with surgical precision, mentioning how it cost $80 but was well worth the price. She seemed so proud of her wealth, as if her spending power was a symbol of her superiority. Ara looked at the food in front of her, a small, simple dish, and said nothing. Veronica, however, couldn't resist subtly throwing another jab. "It's lovely to have someone around who doesn't expect much," she said with a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't you think it's important to spend on quality, not quantity? Money buys quality, after all." Ara could feel the bite in her words. They were trying to diminish her, to make her feel less than, simply because she didn't live the life they did. But Ara wasn't about to rise to the bait. She remained silent, her gaze unwavering. It was a small victory to not let their words get to her, a quiet rebellion in the face of their condescension. It didn't take long for the conversation to turn more personal. Veronica's voice dropped slightly, as if she was about to ask something more intimate, more probing. "So, Ara, I understand, you live alone in a small apartment," she began, her words carrying an air of pity, though she tried to mask it with a smile. "It must be difficult, don't you think? At your age, with no one around, Ara felt the sting of her words, but she didn't flinch. "I manage," she said simply. "I've always managed." She spoke with calm assurance, but Veronica wasn't done. "But your salary, does it cover everything? Do you get by comfortably?" The question hung in the air like a weight, heavy with implications. It wasn't just a simple inquiry. It was a statement, a judgment on Ara's financial worth and her ability to live without help. Ara could sense the trap closing in, but she refused to show any sign of vulnerability. But what Veronica said next would shatter any illusion of politeness. Ara's patience was being tested, and she was ready to respond in a way that no one at that table expected. The atmosphere at the table grew colder, the silence between words growing thicker. Veronica, sensing that she had pushed too far, tried to steer the conversation back to safer territory, but it was too late. The tension was palpable now, and it was clear to everyone that the game had changed. Veronica took another sip of her wine, swirling it slowly, as if savoring the moment, then set the glass down delicately. Her gaze turned toward Ara, and with a calculated smile, she said, "You know, Ara, it's truly admirable how you've managed all these years, raising Marcus on your own. But, as parents, we always want the best for our children, and we've always believed that family should take care of family, especially when it comes to, well, stability." Ara wasn't sure what Veronica meant by stability, but she could feel the underlying message. It was a subtle manipulation, disguised as concern. Veronica continued, her voice now soft and maternal, but with a layer of something colder beneath the sweetness. "We were talking, Franklin and I, and we realized that Marcus must be worried about you. Living alone with such a limited income, it's natural, you know, for a son to worry about his mother." A sharp edge entered Veronica's tone, though she tried to maintain her veneer of politeness. "So, we were thinking, maybe we could help," she said, her eyes now fixed on Ara. "Just a little something, to ease the burden. A modest, monthly allowance, something that would help you live more comfortably, without having to worry about everything, all the time." Ara's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. She could feel the pressure mounting, the unspoken message behind the offer. If you accept our help, you must also accept our terms. She could almost hear the unspoken words. Take our charity and stop being a burden. She took a slow breath, letting the words hang in the air. The subtle offer was more an attempt to control her than to help. It was as if they were giving her money, but in return, they wanted her to disappear. They wanted her to shrink into the background, to step out of Marcus's life and their carefully constructed world of luxury and control. Veronica's voice was saccharine now, the kind of sweetness that felt false. Of course, we wouldn't expect anything in return, except that you respect Marcus and Simone's space. No more interference, no more visits unannounced, no more ... pressure. She paused, as if weighing her words, then added, it's just that, at your age, living alone without much support, we wouldn't want Marcus to feel that he has to constantly take care of you. We want to relieve him of that burden. Ara's stomach turned at the word burden. She kept her composure, though, her eyes cold as she met Veronica's gaze. The implication was clear. They saw her as a problem, a thing to be managed, not as a person deserving of respect or dignity. But Ara was no longer playing by their rules. Her response would change everything, and the dinner would take a turn no one expected. Ara leaned back in her chair, the weight of Veronica's words still hanging in the air like a heavy fog. She could feel the condescending pity seeping through the offer that came with strings attached, a demand for compliance disguised as generosity. It was a moment that demanded a response, but Ara wasn't about to allow herself to be bought, to be reduced to a charitable project. She took a deep breath, keeping her voice calm but steady. That's an interesting proposal, Veronica. Truly generous of you, Ara said, her eyes fixed on Veronica's, now daring her to meet the challenge in her words. Veronica, sensing a compliment, smiled slightly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. I'm glad you see it that way. It's just a small gesture, something to help Marcus feel at ease. Ara, however, wasn't finished. How much exactly would you consider a modest monthly allowance? She asked, her voice quiet, but with an edge that made Veronica pause. But Veronica shifted in her seat, looking a bit taken aback by the question. Well, we were thinking somewhere around $500 or $700 a month, depending on your needs, she replied, her tone a bit more hesitant now, as though she had expected Ara to accept the offer without question. Ara nodded slowly, letting the silence hang for a moment before speaking again. $700 a month for me to disappear from my son's life, to become a shadow in his world, she repeated softly. Yes, I think that's exactly what you mean. Veronica's smile faltered for just a second. I wouldn't put it like that, Ara, but yes, that's the idea. Ara could feel the tension in the room, but she pressed on. And, just for clarification, how much did you contribute to Marcus and Simone's life when they were starting out? She didn't wait for Veronica to answer. The house down payment, for instance. Veronica's eyes lit up at the opportunity to brag. $40,000 for the house down payment. It was an important gift to ensure their future. Ara smiled, but it wasn't a warm one. $40,000, she said, almost thoughtfully. That's incredibly generous. And what about their honeymoon? Veronica's face brightened even further. Oh, $15,000 for their honeymoon trip through Europe, a gift to start their marriage on the right foot. Ara let out a small laugh. Incredible, she said, her voice steady but sharp. $55,000 in gifts to Marcus and Simone, but you want to offer me $700 a month to disappear from their lives. Veronica's smile had completely disappeared now, replaced by a faint frown. It's not like that, she said, her voice defensive. We just want Marcus and Simone to have peace. We want to help, without making things difficult. Ara's eyes narrowed. So, it's not about helping me, it's about controlling the narrative. You want to ensure that I'm no longer a part of Marcus's life, so you can maintain your image of the perfect family, without any distractions. That's what this is about, isn't it? Veronica's mask of kindness was slipping, but what Ara said next would leave everyone at the table reeling, including Marcus, who was already on edge. The table fell into an uneasy silence as Ara's words echoed in the air. For the first time that evening, Veronica seemed caught off guard, her smug confidence cracking. Franklin, too, shifted in his seat, sensing that the dinner was slipping away from their control. Simone, who had been quietly avoiding eye contact, looked up for a brief moment before returning her gaze to her plate. Marcus remained silent, his jaw clenched, unsure of how to proceed. Ara took another breath, steadying herself. She wasn't going to back down now. "You see, Veronica," she began, her voice calm but firm, "it's never been about the money. It's about respect. You and your husband don't respect me, not because I'm poor or simple, but because you think that the only value a person has is in their wealth. You treat people like they're worth only what they have in their bank account. You've done it to me all evening, and I've had enough." Veronica opened her mouth to speak, but Ara cut her off. "You don't get to judge me based on my bank account or the clothes I wear, Veronica. You don't get to define my worth with your money. You see, I've lived a long life, and I've learned something that you'll never understand. True power doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't need to wear flashy clothes, drive fancy cars, or dine at the most expensive restaurants. Power is quiet. It's about making decisions that matter, about having the ability to change lives without needing applause. And I've done that without ever seeking anyone's approval." Veronica's face flushed with anger, but Ara wasn't finished. "And don't think for a second that you're doing this out of kindness. This offered to help me. It's not help. It's control. You want to dictate the terms of my life, to buy my silence, to buy my compliance. You think that because you can write a check, you can buy people's dignity. But I'm not for sale, Veronica. Not to you, and not to anyone." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly torn. He wanted to defend his mother, but at the same time, he was still processing everything that had been revealed. Simone, on the other hand, was silent, her head down as tears welled up in her eyes. The tension at the table was so thick, it was almost suffocating. Veronica, now, visibly flustered, tried to salvage the situation. "Ara, you're overreacting," she said, her voice strained. "We only wanted to offer some support, nothing more. There's no need for this drama. You're making things more difficult than they need to be." Ara raised an eyebrow, her gaze unwavering. "Drama, no. Veronica, what's dramatic is pretending that money makes people better, that it gives them the right to look down on others. What's dramatic is thinking that you can offer people a price for their dignity, for their respect. What's dramatic is your entire approach to life, where everything is measured in dollars and cents." The silence was deafening as everyone absorbed Ara's words. It was clear now that the evening's delicate facade had shattered, and what remained was raw, unfiltered truth. Veronica's mask of politeness had crumbled, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. But Ara wasn't finished. She had one more truth to reveal, one that would leave Veronica and Franklin stunned into silence. Ara sat back in her chair, her posture straight and unwavering, her eyes locked on Veronica, who now seemed to be fighting for composure. Franklin, ever the protector of appearances, was visibly uncomfortable. His fists clenched beneath the table, as though he were trying to suppress his anger. Simone, in contrast, looked like she was barely holding it together, her eyes darting between her parents and her mother-in-law, guilt and confusion written all over her face. Ara knew this was the moment, the one moment that could change everything. She had held back for too long, hidden the truth from Marcus, from everyone. But now, there was no more pretending. There was only honesty, and she wasn't going to let them define her any longer. "I'm not here to beg for your money or your pity, Veronica," Ara said coldly, her voice sharper now. "But if you really want to know what I do, who I am, and why I live the way I do, then let me tell you." The room grew still. Even the clinking of glasses and the soft murmur of other diners seemed to fade into the background as Ara began to speak, her words deliberate and heavy. "I've been working in corporate for almost 20 years, managing millions of dollars, overseeing operations in 5 countries, signing contracts worth millions, making decisions that affect thousands of employees. I earn $40,000 a month, more than enough to live comfortably, but I've never been one to flaunt it. I've never needed to." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Marcus's face turned pale as he stared at his mother, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Simone blinked rapidly, her mind racing to process what she had just heard. $40,000 a month, Ara repeated, her voice firm. "That's not including bonuses, company stock, or investments. I've built my wealth quietly, without anyone knowing, without needing anyone's approval. I didn't need to tell you, Marcus, because I wanted you to grow up understanding that success isn't about what you have, but about what you do with what you've earned." Veronica's smug expression faltered for a split second, then quickly turned to disbelief. You're earning that much, and you never told Marcus, never told anyone," she stammered, her voice trembling as if the revelation had shaken her to her core. Ara nodded slowly. I wanted you to learn the value of hard work, the importance of earning your own way. I didn't want you to grow up thinking money was everything, or that it could solve all your problems. I wanted you to understand that the true measure of a person is their character, not their bank balance. Simone, who had been silently processing everything, looked up at Ara with wide eyes. I don't understand, she whispered. Why did you keep it a secret? Why didn't you tell us? Ara's gaze softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. Because, Simone, I wanted you to see me for who I really am, not for what I earn. I wanted you to see my values, my integrity, and my actions, not just my paycheck. You see, money is a tool. It can buy comfort, security, even influence, but it can't buy respect, love, or peace of mind. Those things come from within. Marcus, still reeling from the shock, finally found his voice. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you let me think you were just some ordinary secretary, struggling to make ends meet? His voice cracked with emotion. Ara turned to him, her eyes softening. Because, Marcus, I wanted you to grow up understanding that the value of a person isn't in their wealth, but in their character, their choices, and their ability to stand up for what they believe in. I wanted you to be independent, not reliant on anyone, not even me. Marcus looked at her, tears welling up in his eyes. I'm so sorry, Mom. I had no idea. All these years, I thought you were just, I don't know, just someone who had to get by. I never realized the sacrifices you made, how much you've done for me, for us. Ara smiled gently, her heart swelling with pride. I never wanted you to know, Marcus. I never wanted you to feel like you owed me. I wanted you to find your own way, just like I did. But just when it seemed like everything was out in the open, Veronica's next words would threaten to derail the fragile progress that had been made. She wasn't done yet, and neither was Ara. Veronica, now visibly shaken, couldn't mask the discomfort creeping over her. The air in the room felt charged, thick with unspoken words and the weight of new revelations. She hadn't expected this. No one had. The proud woman who had spent the evening parading her wealth now found herself facing an uncomfortable truth, one that threatened to undermine everything she believed in. $40,000 of month. Veronica repeated, her voice trembling slightly, as though she couldn't quite grasp the enormity of what Ara had just revealed. But you live like this. She gestured around the modest surroundings of Ara's small, unassuming apartment. In this tiny place, with these clothes. Ara, calm and poised, met Veronica's gaze squarely. Yes, Veronica, because for me, wealth isn't about showing off. It's not about flaunting what I have. It's about peace of mind, dignity, and doing the right thing. You can buy the finest things in life, but that doesn't mean you're richer than someone who chooses humility over extravagance. Veronica's lips curled into a thin smile, one laced with frustration. But don't you want more? Why settle for so little when you could have so much? It just doesn't make sense. Ara leaned forward, her tone unwavering. It doesn't make sense to you, because to you, life is measured in things: what you own, how much you spend. But to me, real richness is in what you give, not in what you take. It's in your character, your integrity. I've spent my life building something meaningful, not something to impress others, and that's a choice I made long ago. Franklin, who had been silent until now, chimed in, his voice sharp with disbelief. This is absurd. You're saying all of this, but you're sitting here acting like some kind of martyr. You're making us out to be the villains, just because we've worked hard to get what we have. We've earned everything we own. Ara looked at him, her eyes steady. I never said you were the villains, Franklin, but you are mistaken if you think your wealth makes you superior. There are people out there who have more money than you can imagine, but they still don't understand the real value of life. And there are people with far less who are happier, more content, because they understand that happiness doesn't come with a price tag. Simone, who had been silent throughout most of the exchange, finally looked up, her face pale. I don't know what to believe anymore, she whispered. I've always looked up to my parents, admired them for how much they've given me, but I never saw what they were really doing. I thought they were helping, but now it feels like they were just controlling us, using money to make us feel like we owed them. Ara placed a hand on Simone's. That's the hardest part, isn't it? Realizing that what you thought was love was actually manipulation in disguise. They gave you things, but they took your freedom, your voice, your choices. They made you feel like you had to pay them back. And that's the truth. They don't love you for who you are. They love you for what they can get from you. Veronica's face flushed with anger, but she couldn't refute the truth in Ara's words. She had spent her entire life accumulating wealth, but she had failed to teach her daughter the value of kindness, respect, and empathy. The silence that followed was heavy, each person at the table lost in their own thoughts. Marcus, who had been struggling with his own emotions, finally spoke up. "I didn't know, Mom. I didn't know any of this, and now I feel like I've been living in a lie. I thought I understood what was going on in our family, but now I'm not sure of anything." Ara smiled softly at him, her expression full of love. "It's okay, Marcus. You didn't know, but now you do, and that's what matters. You'll make your own decisions, your own way, and I'll support you in whatever you choose. But remember, true strength comes from knowing who you are, not from how much you have." But even as Ara spoke, she could feel the tension shift in the room. And just as she thought the conversation might come to a close, a final bombshell dropped, and it was one that none of them were prepared for. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken words and the weight of realizations. Veronica, still reeling from the loss of control, could barely hide her frustration. She had spent so many years building this facade, this illusion of superiority, and now it was all crumbling in front of her eyes. Franklin, too, was visibly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. But just as Ara thought the tension had reached its peak, Simone spoke up, her voice trembling. "Mom, I need to say something," she said, her eyes meeting Then Eris, "You've always told me that money is everything, that it's the only way to measure a person's worth. But now I see how wrong you were. I see how you've controlled me, how you've manipulated me with your wealth, how you made me believe that I owed you something just because you gave me things. You didn't love me. You just wanted me to follow your rules, to live your life. You wanted me to be a reflection of your success, not my own." Veronica's face twisted with disbelief and anger. She opened her mouth to speak, but Simone held up her hand. "No, Mom, I've been silent for too long. I've let you control my life, my decisions. I've let you treat people like they're only worth what they have in their bank accounts. But I'm done. I'm done living in your world. I want to live in a world where love is unconditional, where respect is earned, not bought." Marcus, who had been silent up until now, turned to Simone, his face a mixture of shock and admiration. "Simone, I can't believe you're saying this. I thought we had everything. I thought we were happy. But now I see it. I see that you were suffocating under their expectations, under their control." Simone nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I was, Marcus, but now I realize that I don't need them to be happy. I don't need their money or their approval. I just need to be myself, to live my own life, and if that means setting boundaries, even with them, then so be it." Ara watched the exchange with a sense of pride and relief. This was what she had been hoping for. Simone, finally waking up to the truth, finally seeing beyond the lies her parents had fed her. Veronica's face twisted in anger, her pride taking a hit she couldn't ignore. "You don't understand, Simone. You think you can just throw everything away, but you'll regret it. You'll come crawling back when you realize you can't survive without our help." Simone shook her head, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. "I'll survive, Mom. Not just survive, I'll thrive. On my own terms. I'm not afraid anymore." Franklin, now furious, slammed his hand on the table. "This is outrageous. You're turning against us, against everything we've done for you. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us." But Simone's eyes remained calm, resolute. "You gave me things, but you never gave me the one thing that truly mattered, and now I'm taking it back. I'm taking my life back." The silence that followed was deafening. Veronica and Franklin, once so confident in their control, were now floundering, unable to comprehend how their carefully constructed world had been shattered in a single evening. Era stood up from the table, her voice firm but kind. "I think we've all heard enough for one night," she said, her gaze sweeping over the room. "Veronica, Franklin, you've shown me exactly who you are tonight, and now you can live with the consequences of your actions. But I hope that one day you'll realize that no amount of money can replace genuine love, respect, and empathy." She turned to Marcus and Simone, her eyes softening. "I'm proud of both of you, proud of the decisions you're making, the boundaries you're setting. This is the beginning of something new, and I will always be here to support you, no matter what." Simone stood up, walking over to Ara. Without a word, she hugged her mother-in-law, her arms tight around her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." Ara smiled and hugged her back. You don't have to thank me, Simone. You've done this for yourself. You've chosen to be free. As Ara made her way toward the exit, she knew the evening wasn't over yet. The consequences of this night would ripple through their family for a long time, but she had no regrets. Not anymore. The evening was far from over, but the tension had shifted dramatically. Veronica and Franklin sat in stunned silence, their world unraveling with every word spoken. The grand illusions they had built, the carefully curated image of wealth and control, lay in ruins around them. Marcus and Simone, though, stood in stark contrast to them both, had been awakened. Both had made choices that were long overdue. Ara, for her part, had never felt more at peace. She had spoken her truth, stood her ground, and shown her son and his wife that real wealth wasn't measured in bank balances or material possessions. It was in integrity, in making the hard decisions, in living with dignity. As Ara made her way toward the door, she paused, turning back for one last moment. Veronica and Franklin were still seated, their faces frozen in disbelief. Ara couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about victory, it was about liberation. She had given them the opportunity to show who they truly were, and they had done so perfectly. But now, it was time to leave this chapter behind. Marcus, Simone, Ara said, her voice softening as she looked back at her son and daughter. This is the beginning of a new journey for both of you, a journey of your own, where you make your own rules. Just remember, true freedom comes when you stop letting others define you, when you stop seeking validation from the outside world, and always stay true to who you are, no matter what anyone says. Simone nodded, wiping away the last of her tears. I will, Ara, I promise. I never thought I could stand up to my parents, but now I see that I have the power to choose my own life, my own values. Marcus walked over to Ara, his face still pale but filled with admiration. Mom, I don't know what to say. I had no idea what you've been through, what you've built. I feel ashamed for not seeing it sooner. Ara placed a hand on his shoulder, her smile warm. You don't have to apologize, Marcus. You saw what I wanted you to see, but now you know the truth, and that's what matters. I've always wanted you to stand on your own 2 feet, to be your own person, and you're doing that now. Marcus took a deep breath, his posture changing as the weight of the evening settled on him. I've learned more tonight than I have in years. I'm proud of you, Mom. I'm proud of who you are and everything you've accomplished. And I promise I'll never take you for granted again. Simone walked over and hugged her mother-in-law once more. Thank you, Ara, for everything. You've opened my eyes, and I'm ready to start living my life for me, not for anyone else. Ara's heart swelled with pride. You've already made the hardest decision, Simone. The rest will follow. Just trust yourself. As they stood there, exchanging silent nods and glances of understanding, Veronica finally spoke, her voice trembling. You've ruined everything. We did everything for you, and this is how you repay us. You think you're better than us now. Ara turned slowly, meeting Veronica's gaze for the last time. No, Veronica, I don't think I'm better than you. I just think I'm different, and that's something I've accepted. You, however, have yet to understand that true strength doesn't come from money. It comes from integrity. You'll have to live with that. Franklin, his face red with fury, stood up abruptly. You can't just walk away from this. This isn't over. You don't get to humiliate us like this and just leave. Ara shook her head, her voice calm but resolute. I'm not here to engage in a power struggle. I've said my piece, and I've given you the truth. What you choose to do with it is up to you. But don't think for a second that I'll ever be a part of your games again. With that, Ara turned on her heel and walked toward the door, her steps steady and sure. She could hear the faint murmurs of Veronica and Franklin behind her, their anger and disbelief palpable, but she didn't turn back. She had done what she came to do. She had exposed the truth, not just for them, but for herself. And now, she was free. As Ara stepped into the cool night air, she felt a sense of finality. This was her moment of liberation. But as the taxi drove her back to her simple apartment, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy for Marcus and Simone. The true test of their new life was just beginning. As the taxi sped through the quiet streets, Ara sat back, her mind still processing the events of the evening, the weight of the dinner, the words exchanged, the truths revealed. It was a lot to carry. But as she looked out the window, watching the city lights flicker by, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She had spoken her truth. She had exposed the people who had tried to control her, and in doing so, she had liberated herself and, perhaps, in some way, Marcus and Simone as well. When the taxi pulled up outside her apartment, Ara stepped out into the cool night air, her old leather bag slung over her shoulder, her worn shoes clicking softly against the pavement. She hadn't gone home feeling victorious or triumphant. She had gone home feeling like she had taken off a heavy coat she didn't realize she'd been wearing for years. The night was quiet, the streets calm and empty, a stark contrast to the storm that had unfolded inside that restaurant. Ara stood for a moment on the sidewalk, taking it all in the sound of her breath. The rustle of the leaves in the wind, the hum of distant traffic. For the first time in a long while, she felt the freedom of being completely herself. She walked up the stairs to her modest apartment, each step deliberate, steady. She didn't need an elevator. There was no rush, no need to hurry. This apartment, this life, had always been enough for her. It wasn't about luxury. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was simply her space, her sanctuary. Inside, the familiar surroundings greeted her. The old couch, the small kitchen, the simple furnishings, all of it was hers. All of it was real. She kicked off her shoes, changed into comfortable clothes, and made herself a cup of tea. The steam rose from the cup, carrying with it a sense of quiet comfort. She sat on the couch, sipping the warm tea and reflecting on the night's events. Simone's transformation had been the most surprising. Ara had always known that Simone was kind-hearted, but she had never imagined she would have the courage to confront her parents like that. Simone had taken the first step toward independence, toward freedom, but the road ahead for her wouldn't be easy. Her parents wouldn't back down quietly. They would push, manipulate, try to regain control. It was up to Simone now to stand firm and keep the boundaries she had set. Ara thought about Marcus. He had been so blindsided by the revelations, so confused by the world he thought he knew. But she was proud of him. He had taken the news with more grace than she had expected, and he had supported Simone in her decision to break free. Now, he had a chance to live life on his own terms, without the weight of his parents' expectations. The sound of her phone vibrating on the coffee table broke her thoughts. She reached for it, surprised to see a message from Simone. Ara, I need to thank you again for everything. You've changed my life tonight. I'm starting to see things differently now. I'm going to keep setting boundaries with my parents, and I'm going to do this for me. I know it's going to be hard, but I'm ready. Thank you for showing me that there's another way to live. Ara smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. She quickly typed a response. You've made the hardest decision, Simone. Now, you just have to stay true to yourself. It won't be easy, but you'll find your way. I'm always here for you. She put her phone down, took another sip of her tea, and settled back into the couch. There was a sense of finality to the night. It felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The road ahead would be challenging for Simone and Marcus, but it was a road they would walk together on their own terms. And Ara knew that, no matter what happened, they would be okay. As Ara looked out the window, the city slowly fading into the background, she knew this was far from over. There would be more challenges, more choices, and more lessons to learn. But one thing was certain: no one, not even her own family, would ever be able to take away her peace again. The following days passed in a blur for Ara. As she returned to her usual routine, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The weight of the dinner and the truths exposed still lingered, but now there was a sense of clarity. Ara had taken control of her own narrative, and in doing so, she had opened a door for Simone and Marcus to walk through, one that led to a life of authenticity and freedom. Simone's message had touched her deeply, but it wasn't the only sign that the wheels of change were turning. Marcus, though still processing everything, had begun to act differently. He reached out more often, asked more questions, and, for the first time in a long time, he seemed to be seeking a deeper understanding of his own values. One evening, about a week after the dinner, Marcus showed up at Ara's apartment unannounced. When she opened the door, he was standing there with an awkward smile, holding a bouquet of flowers in his hand. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with something else, something more vulnerable. "Mom," he began, "I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry for everything, for not asking the right questions, for not seeing you for who you really are. I feel like I've been living in the dark, and I can't believe it took something like this for me to wake up." Ara stepped aside to let him in, her heart swelling with emotion. "Marcus, you don't have to apologize," she said softly. "You didn't know. But now you do, and that's what matters. I wanted you to see things for yourself, to come to your own conclusions. You don't owe me an apology." He nodded, but the guilt in his eyes was clear. "I guess I've been living in a bubble, thinking I had everything figured out. I've spent so much time trying to meet everyone else's expectations, Simone's, my parents, that I forgot to ask myself what I actually wanted." Ara smiled warmly. "That's something you'll need to keep asking yourself, son. What you want, what you value. It's easy to get caught up in everyone else's vision for your life, but at the end of the day, it's your life to live. No one else can walk it for you." Marcus looked around her simple apartment, taking in the surroundings with new eyes. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about how you built your life. Not to impress anyone, but because it was right for you. I don't think I've ever really thought about what I truly want." "You will," Ara said, her voice reassuring. "It takes time, but the fact that you're asking yourself those questions, now that's the first step toward building the life you want." They sat down together on the couch, the conversation flowing easily now. It was clear that Marcus was beginning to understand something fundamental about his own identity. Something that had always been there but was now being uncovered. Later that evening, Marcus opened up more. "I'm still processing everything from that dinner. The way Simone's parents treated you, and how they've treated us over the years. It's just, I never saw it. I thought they were doing what was best for us, but now I see that they've been controlling us with money, and I hate that I let it happen." Ara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's hard, Marcus. It's hard to realize that the people who claim to love you the most can also be the ones who try to manipulate you. But what you do with that knowledge is what matters. You have to decide who you want to be, whether you want to continue living by their rules, or if you want to create your own path." Marcus looked at her with a newfound determination in his eyes. "I think I've finally made my choice. I want to build my life on my own terms. I want to set boundaries with my parents, not just for me, but for Simone, too. She's been so afraid of their judgment, and I've been too blind to see it." Ara smiled, proud of him. "You're on the right track, Marcus. It's not easy, and it won't always be smooth. But setting boundaries is one of the most important things you can do for your own peace of mind. Just remember, you don't owe anyone an explanation for living your truth." Simone had been quiet in the background during the conversation, but now she spoke up, her voice filled with sincerity. "I've been talking to Marcus a lot about everything, and I've come to realize that I've been hiding behind my parents' expectations, too. I've been so afraid of losing their approval, but now I see that it's not worth it." Ara turned to Simone, her heart swelling with pride. "Simone, you're stronger than you think. This is just the beginning, but I know you'll make the right choices, and I'll be here every step of the way." Simone smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Ara. Thank you for everything. I don't know where I would be right now without your guidance." As the evening came to a close, Ara realized that the hard conversations, the painful truths, had finally led to something beautiful. Her family was beginning to understand what true wealth wasn't. It wasn't about money. It was about love, respect, and the freedom to live authentically.